She needed to warn Seraphina. But first, she needed more information. Chapter 11, Duke Kael begins secretly helping Snow. Snow wandered through the garden later that evening. Her mind was full of thoughts. If they forced Seraphina to attend the hunting festival, the story might return to its original path. She needed a way to stop it. Suddenly, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "You look busy." Snow turned around. Duke Kael stood there, leaning casually against a tree. Snow sighed internally. Why does this man always appear like a ghost? Kael walked closer. "You've been investigating the servants." Snow froze. Kael smirked slightly. "You're not very subtle." Snow glared at him. Kael crouched down. His voice lowered. "The hunting festival." Snow's ears twitched. "So you already know." Snow stared at him suspiciously. Kael continued calmly. "There are nobles trying to manipulate the prince into meeting Seraphina." Snow growled softly. Kael nodded. "Good, we agree." Snow blinked. Kael looked toward the mansion. "I've been investigating them for months." Snow felt surprised. Months? That meant Kael had been protecting Seraphina long before Snow started interfering. Kael spoke quietly. "If you want to protect her," he looked directly at Snow, "then work with me." Snow hesitated. Trusting Duke Kael felt dangerous. But right now, he was the only ally she had. Chapter 12, the hero prince finally appears. The royal hunting festival arrived quickly. The forest outside, the capital was filled with noble tents and decorated horses. Nobles gathered for entertainment and political conversations. Seraphina didn't want to attend, but her father insisted. "It would be suspicious if we refused." Snow stayed hidden inside Seraphina's cloak again. Her eyes carefully scanned the area. Then she saw him, Prince Adrian. Tall, handsome, golden hair shining under the sunlight. Nobles praised him as the future of the empire, the hero of the story. In the original novel, he believed Seraphina bullied the heroine Lily, and from that moment, he began treating her like a villain. Snow growled softly. This guy caused half the tragedy. Prince Adrian walked through the camp, greeting nobles. His eyes eventually landed on Seraphina. Snow's heart dropped. The moment had arrived. Prince Adrian approached. "Lady Seraphina Valmont." Seraphina bowed politely. "Your Highness." Snow watched carefully, waiting for the misunderstanding. But suddenly, another figure stepped between them. Duke Kael. His voice was calm. "Your Highness." Prince Adrian frowned slightly. "Duke Ravenheart." Kael spoke casually. "I believe the Emperor requested your presence." Prince Adrian hesitated, then sighed. "You're right." He glanced at Seraphina again, but he had no choice except to leave. Snow blinked. The meeting was stopped. Completely. Kael looked down at the fox hidden in Seraphina's cloak, and winked. Snow's jaw dropped. He just saved the story again. Chapter 13, the fox gets jealous of Kael. That evening, Seraphina walked through the forest path near the hunting camp. Snow sat on her shoulder. Suddenly Kael appeared beside them. Seraphina looked slightly surprised. "You appear often." Kael shrugged. "Coincidence?" Snow glared at him. Seraphina didn't notice the silent argument happening between them. Kael walked beside Seraphina calmly. They began discussing political matters. Snow felt irritated. Seraphina was smiling slightly, something she rarely did. Kael said something quietly. Seraphina laughed. Snow's fur puffed up. "Why are they getting along so well?" Snow jumped between them suddenly. Kael raised an eyebrow. "You're jealous." Snow immediately turned away. Seraphina laughed softly. "She does that often." Kael smirked. "I noticed." Snow growled. Kael whispered quietly, so only the fox could hear. "You're not the only one protecting her." Snow stared at him. Kael's eyes softened slightly. "But I started much earlier." Chapter 14, the villain's hidden past with Seraphina. Later that night, Snow sat beside the campfire outside the noble tents. Kael sat across from her. Seraphina had returned to her tent. Snow stared at him. Kael sighed slightly. "You want to know why I protect her?" Snow's ears twitched. Kael looked up at the night sky. "When we were children." His voice became quieter. "Seraphina saved my life." Snow blinked. Kael continued slowly. "There was an assassination attempt on my family. I was injured and hiding in the forest. No one helped me." His eyes darkened slightly. "Except her." Snow listened carefully. Kael smiled faintly. "She didn't know who I was. She only saw an injured boy. She brought me food and bandaged my wounds." Snow realized something. Seraphina probably forgot that moment, but Kael never did. Kael looked toward Seraphina's tent. She was always kind. The world just never noticed. Snow slowly relaxed. For the first time, she truly understood him. Duke Kael wasn't protecting Seraphina because she was powerful. He wasn't manipulating her. He wasn't using her. He simply loved her long before the story even began. Snow sighed. "Maybe." Just maybe, the villain of the story was actually the only person who truly understood the villainess. Chapter 15, Enemies begin their first attack. The capital city slept peacefully under silver moonlight. Inside the Seraphina estate, candles burned softly in the grand study as Seraphina read quietly by the window. Snow, the small white fox, lay curled beside her papers. The night was calm. Too calm, Snow's ears suddenly twitched. Her sharp fox senses felt something wrong. Footsteps, light, careful, deadly. Snow jumped onto the table. Seraphina blinked. Snow, what is it? The fox ran to the window and stared outside. 3 shadows moved across the garden walls. Assassins. Snow immediately panicked. This shouldn't happen yet. The attack in the novel happens months later. Her tail puffed up. She scratched Seraphina's sleeve. Seraphina frowned. You want me to leave the room? Snow nodded frantically. Before Seraphina could ask more, a loud crash shattered the window. Glass exploded inward. Black-clothed assassins jumped into the room. Seraphina froze. One of them spoke coldly. Kill the villainess. Snow's eyes burned with rage. She leapt at the assassin's face. KYA. Her claws scratched his mask as Seraphina grabbed a candlestick and backed away. But the assassins were trained killers. One of them grabbed Snow midair. The fox struggled violently. Let go of me, you stupid background character. But of course, they heard only fox noises. Seraphina shouted. Snow. The assassin holding Snow smirked. Take the fox, the master wants it. Before Seraphina could stop them, they vanished into the night. Seraphina stood frozen. The room silent. Her hands trembled. Snow was gone. Chapter 16, The Fox Gets Kidnapped. Snow woke up tied with thick magical chains. She was inside a dark underground chamber. Torches flickered along the stone walls. Several masked figures stood around her. One of them spoke. So this is the fox that stays beside the villainess. Snow glared. Great. Kidnapped by plot villains. One man crouched in front of her. You're strange for a fox. Snow looked away. I refused to talk. The man continued. You appeared right before Seraphina began changing. Snow's heart froze. They noticed. Another voice echoed from the shadows. Enough. A tall nobleman stepped forward. Snow's eyes widened. The Duke of the North, one of the secret villains behind the original plot. He stared down at the fox. Animals cannot change destiny. Snow's tail flicked angrily. Watch me. The Duke smirked. Use the fox as bait. Chapter 17, Seraphina breaks down. Morning came. The mansion was silent. Servants whispered nervously. Seraphina sat alone in her room. Snow's bed was empty. Her eyes were red. For the first time in years, Seraphina looked completely lost. She whispered softly, Snow, where are you? Her fingers trembled. Since the fox arrived, her lonely life had changed. Someone waited for her. Someone followed her everywhere. Someone cared. And now, Snow was gone. Tears fell down her face. A servant entered nervously. Lady Seraphina, Duke Kael has arrived. Seraphina slowly lifted her head. Moments later, the tall figure of Duke Kael stepped into the room. His cold silver eyes immediately noticed her tear-stained face. What happened? Seraphina whispered. They took Snow. Silence filled the room. The temperature seemed to drop. Kael's expression darkened. Who? Seraphina shook her head. I don't know. Kael turned toward the door. His voice became terrifyingly calm. I will bring her back. Chapter 18, Duke Kael's Ruthless Revenge. 3 days later, a secret underground base burned in flames. Screams echoed in the night. Duke Kael stood in the middle of the destruction. His black coat was stained with blood. One surviving assassin crawled away in terror. You're a monster. Kael walked toward him slowly. You kidnapped something that belongs to Seraphina. The assassin trembled. It was ordered by the Northern Duke. Kael's sword flashed. Silence. The assassin collapsed. Kael looked toward the burning ruins. Search every location. His knights nodded. Yes, Your Grace. Kael's voice turned cold. Anyone involved will die. Far away, inside another hidden chamber. Snow sneezed. Someone is committing murder for me. She sighed. Probably Kael. Chapter 19, The Fox reveals she was once human. Later that night, Kael finally found the chamber. The door exploded open. Snow looked up. Oh good, the psychopath arrived. Kael cut the magical chains instantly. Snow jumped into his arms. The fox sniffed him. Yep, covered in blood. Kael stared at her carefully. You're not a normal fox. Snow froze. Uh-oh. Kael continued. You understand everything. Snow slowly sat down. For a long moment, neither moved. Finally, Snow sighed. Then something impossible happened. A soft glow surrounded the fox. Kael's eyes widened slightly. The fox transformed. A small girl appeared where the fox had been. White hair, golden eyes. She looked about 10 years old. The girl crossed her arms. Fine, I'll explain. Kael stared at her silently. The girl sighed. I used to be human. Kael remained calm. Continue. The girl looked directly at him. I was reincarnated into this novel. Silence. Then she added seriously. And Seraphina is supposed to die in the original story. Kael's expression darkened. The girl smiled slightly. But I plan to break the entire plot. She pointed at him. And you're the villain who helps me. Kael stared at her for a long moment. Then he said calmly, Good. The girl blinked. That's it. Kael turned toward the door. Let's go home. The girl sighed. Why are you so calm about this? Kael answered coldly. As long as Seraphina lives, nothing else matters. The girl stared at him. Then she muttered quietly. Yeah, definitely a villain. But she smiled. Because for the first time, the future of the story had truly begun to change. Chapter 20, Seraphina learns the truth. Night covered the capital when Duke Kael finally returned to Seraphina's estate. The mansion doors opened quietly. Servants froze in shock. Duke Kael stood at the entrance, holding the small white fox in his arms. Snow wagged her fluffy tail proudly. Kyu. A servant gasped. Lady Seraphina, the fox has returned. Footsteps hurried down the grand stairs. Seraphina appeared at the hallway entrance. Her eyes widened the moment she saw Snow. Snow. Snow jumped out of Kael's arms and ran across the floor. Seraphina immediately knelt down and hugged her tightly. The fox buried her face in Seraphina's shoulder. For a moment, neither moved. Seraphina's voice trembled. I thought I lost you. Snow felt something warm in her chest. Why does this feel like being hugged by family? Seraphina slowly looked up at Kael. Thank you, Duke Kael. Kael simply nodded. But Snow noticed something strange. Seraphina's hands were trembling. She had clearly been crying for days. Snow suddenly made a decision. Maybe it's time. The fox gently slipped out of Seraphina's arms. A soft light surrounded her body. Seraphina gasped. Snow. The fox's form slowly changed. The light faded. A small white-haired girl stood where the fox had been. Seraphina froze. Snow. The girl smiled awkwardly. Hello. Seraphina blinked several times. Then fainted. Chapter 21, Chaos in the Drawing Room. A few minutes later, Seraphina slowly woke up on the couch. Her head hurt. She blinked. Across the room sat Duke Kael. Beside him sat the small white-haired girl eating cookies. Seraphina stared. The girl waved happily. Good morning. Seraphina slowly sat up. Snow. The girl nodded. Yes. Silence. Then Seraphina whispered slowly. You turned into a child. Snow scratched her head. Technically, I am a child now. Seraphina looked toward Kael. Why are you calmed? Kael answered simply. She explained. Snow coughed. Yeah, about that. She looked at Seraphina seriously. Seraphina, I used to be human. Seraphina blinked. Snow continued. I was reincarnated into this world. Silence filled the room. Snow sighed. And in the original story. She hesitated. You die. Seraphina's eyes widened slightly. Snow looked down. Your family gets destroyed. Everyone betrays you. You die alone. The room became quiet. But Seraphina didn't cry. Instead, she asked softly, Is that why you always told me to stay away from certain people? Snow nodded. Yes. Seraphina slowly smiled. Thank you. Snow blinked. Wait, you're not shocked. Seraphina laughed quietly. My fox turned into a human child. I think shock has already passed. Snow sighed. Fair point. Chapter 22, The Prince Arrives. The next morning, the palace announced an important guest. The crown prince had returned to the capital. His name was Prince Adrian. He was the male lead of the original story. Snow immediately panicked. This is bad. Seraphina blinked. Why? Snow grabbed her shoulders. Listen carefully. You must avoid the crown prince at all costs. Seraphina tilted her head. Why? Snow groaned. Because in the original story he hates you. Everything begins going wrong after you meet him. Seraphina looked thoughtful. Then she nodded. All right. Snow froze. That's it. Seraphina smiled. If you say it's dangerous, I'll avoid him. Snow felt emotional. This villainess trusts me way too much. But fate had other plans. That afternoon, a royal carriage stopped in front of Seraphina's estate. Snow looked out the window. Her soul nearly left her body. Standing at the gate was a tall, golden-haired man. Prince Adrian. The male lead had arrived. Snow screamed internally. The plot is chasing US. Chapter 23, Kael's unexpected jealousy. Prince Adrian entered the mansion politely. Seraphina greeted him calmly. Snow hid behind a chair. She whispered to herself, "Stay invisible." But Prince Adrian noticed the small girl immediately. He looked curious. "Who is this child?" Snow froze. Seraphina answered smoothly, "My adopted sister." Snow almost choked. "Since when?" Prince Adrian knelt slightly to Snow's level. He smiled kindly. "What is your name?" Snow stared at him suspiciously. "Male lead detected." She answered coldly. "Snow." Prince Adrian chuckled. "You're adorable." From across the room, Duke Kael suddenly spoke. "She bites." Prince Adrian raised an eyebrow. Snow smirked. "Correct." Prince Adrian turned back toward Seraphina. "I wanted to see you." Seraphina looked confused. "Why?" Prince Adrian smiled gently. "I heard rumors about you." Snow groaned quietly. This is exactly how the original story starts. Meanwhile, Kael watched silently. His eyes were darker than usual. Snow noticed immediately. She whispered under her breath, "Oh no." Kael was jealous. Chapter 24, Snow's ridiculous plan. That night Snow gathered both Seraphina and Kael in the study. She placed a map on the table dramatically. Seraphina blinked. "What is this?" Snow pointed seriously. "This is my anti-plot survival plan." Kael crossed his arms. "Explain." Snow nodded. "Step 1. She pointed at Seraphina. "You must stay away from Prince Adrian." Seraphina nodded obediently. Snow continued. "Step 2. She pointed at Kael. "You must stop looking like a final boss villain." Kael raised an eyebrow. "Impossible." Snow sighed. "Step 3. She pointed to herself proudly. "I monitor everything." Seraphina laughed softly. "You're very serious." Snow puffed her cheeks. "This story is dangerous." Kael looked amused. "For a child, you're very dramatic." Snow glared at him. "You're literally the villain of this story." Kael replied calmly. "Good." Snow sighed. "This world is hopeless." But deep down, Snow felt something new. Seraphina was alive. The villain loved her. And the future of the story was already changing. The fox who tried to rewrite fate had accidentally created an even more chaotic story. Chapter 25, The First Betrayal. The capital buzzed with rumors. Servants whispered in markets. Nobles gossiped in their drawing rooms. The topic was always the same. Seraphina. Someone had spread dangerous lies. She is secretly working with Duke Kael. She plans to overthrow the royal family. She's hiding a strange child in her mansion. Inside the Seraphina estate, the atmosphere had turned tense. Snow sat on the windowsill, listening carefully to the servants outside. Her ears twitched. This wasn't in the original story. Seraphina entered the room quietly. "You heard the rumors." Snow nodded. "Someone is targeting you." Seraphina walked to the window and looked at the city. Her expression remained calm, but Snow could see the sadness behind it. "People already believed I was a villain," Seraphina said softly. "This only makes it easier." Snow clenched her small fists. Someone is trying to push the story back to the original plot. And that meant only one thing. The real enemies had begun moving. Chapter 26, A Dangerous Invitation. 2 days later, a royal invitation arrived. The palace was hosting a grand evening ball. Every noble family in the capital was required to attend. Snow stared at the invitation like it was poison. "This is a trap." Seraphina smiled lightly. "It probably is." Snow slammed the table. "Then don't go." Seraphina shook her head. "If I refuse, the rumors will grow worse." Snow groaned. "Politics is the worst." Just then, Duke Kael entered the room. "I will attend with her." Snow immediately pointed at him. "Good." Then she added suspiciously, "But behave normally." Kael looked confused. "What is normally?" Snow sighed. "Just try not to threaten half the nobles with your face." Seraphina laughed quietly. Chapter 27, The Royal Ball. The palace ballroom glittered with golden chandeliers. Music echoed softly as nobles filled the hall. When Seraphina entered with Duke Kael, the entire room went silent. Whispers spread immediately. "The Villainess." She came with the Northern Duke. Snow walked beside them in a small silver dress. She looked around carefully. Every important character from the original novel is here. Then she saw him. Prince Adrian. The male lead stood near the throne speaking with nobles. The moment he noticed Seraphina, he walked toward her. Snow internally screamed. "The plot is happening again." Prince Adrian bowed politely. "Lady Seraphina." Seraphina nodded calmly. "Your Highness." Snow watched nervously. But before the conversation could continue, a loud voice interrupted. Well, well. A beautiful noblewoman stepped forward. Lady Alina. In the original story, she secretly hated Seraphina, and she was the one who helped destroy her reputation. Alina smiled sweetly. Lady Seraphina, I heard you adopted a strange child. Snow glared at her. Here comes the snake. Chapter 28, The Public Humiliation. Alina stepped closer to Snow. So this is the child. She looked Snow up and down with obvious disdain. How unusual. The surrounding nobles began whispering. Alina continued loudly. I heard rumors this child appeared mysteriously. Snow crossed her arms. Jealous. Gasps spread through the crowd. Alina's smile stiffened. Seraphina spoke calmly. Lady Alina, please mind your words. But Alina wasn't finished. Oh my, are you protecting her so fiercely because you have something to hide? The crowd grew louder. Snow felt anger rising in her chest. This woman ruined Seraphina in the original story. But before Snow could speak, a deep voice echoed through the hall. That is enough. Duke Kael stepped forward. The entire ballroom went silent. His cold silver eyes locked onto Alina. If you accuse Seraphina again, his voice became deadly quiet. I will personally destroy your family. Alina turned pale. Snow whispered, okay, maybe that was slightly too aggressive. But secretly she felt satisfied. Chapter 29, A Quiet Moment. Later that night, the three of them left the palace. Snow sat in the carriage beside Seraphina. Outside, snowflakes began falling softly. Seraphina looked out the window quietly. Snow asked gently, are you okay? Seraphina smiled faintly. I'm used to it. Snow shook her head. You shouldn't be. Seraphina looked down at the small girl beside her. Snow continued seriously. I promised I would change your story. You won't die alone. Seraphina's eyes softened. She gently patted Snow's head. Thank you. Across from them, Duke Kael watched silently. His gaze moved between them. Then he said quietly, she won't die. Snow looked at him. Kael's voice was calm but firm. As long as I exist, no one will touch Seraphina. Snow sighed. Well, that's very villain-like. Kael replied calmly. I am the villain. Snow leaned back in the seat. This story is completely broken. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the future anymore. Because now the villain, the villainess, and the fox were standing on the same side. And the real battle for the story had only just begun. Chapter 30, The Enemy Reveals Themselves. 3 nights after the royal ball, the capital became strangely quiet. Snow sat on the library floor surrounded by books. Her small face looked serious. This doesn't make sense. Seraphina sat nearby reading calmly. What doesn't? Snow tapped the map she had drawn earlier. In the original story, Lady Alina only started attacking you after the prince rejected her. Seraphina blinked. But that hasn't happened yet. Snow nodded. Exactly. Which meant something terrifying. Someone else is controlling the story. At that moment, a servant rushed into the room. Lady Seraphina, there has been an attack on the western estate. Snow jumped to her feet. That estate belongs to your uncle. Seraphina's face went pale. Snow's mind raced. In the original story, this was the event that started the downfall of Seraphina's entire family. The conspiracy had finally begun. Chapter 31, The Hidden Mastermind. Late that night, Duke Kael returned from investigating the attack. His expression was darker than usual. Snow immediately asked, what did you find? Kael placed a report on the table. Evidence of treason. Seraphina frowned. Against my family. Kael nodded. But it's fabricated. Snow clenched her fists. Someone is framing them. Kael's silver eyes narrowed. I know who. Snow leaned forward. Who? Kael answered quietly. The royal chancellor. Snow's eyes widened. That man was one of the biggest villains in the original story. The mastermind behind Seraphina's destruction. But in the novel, his identity was revealed much later. Snow muttered nervously. The plot is accelerating. Seraphina looked confused. Snow sighed. It means the enemies are getting desperate. Chapter 32, Snow's Strange Jealousy. The next morning, Prince Adrian visited again. Snow watched suspiciously from behind a chair. The prince smiled warmly at Seraphina. You seem tired. Seraphina replied politely. It has been a stressful week. Snow narrowed her eyes. Why is he smiling so much? Prince Adrian then noticed Snow. Snow, would you like sweets? He offered a small candy box. Snow crossed her arms. Bribery detected. Prince Adrian laughed. You're a very cautious child. Across the room, Duke Kael watched silently. Snow suddenly realized something. Both men were staring at Seraphina. Snow's brain slowly processed the situation. Wait, she pointed at them. You two are competing. Prince Adrian looked amused. Competing? Snow nodded seriously. Yes. Then she pointed at Seraphina. For her, Seraphina nearly choked on her tea. Kael remained calm. Prince Adrian laughed loudly. Snow sighed. This story just became a romance war. Chapter 33, The First Real Battle. That evening news arrived. The royal chancellor had issued a warrant. Seraphina's uncle had been arrested for treason. Snow slammed the table. This is exactly how the original tragedy begins. Seraphina looked pale. If my family is declared traitors. Snow finished the sentence quietly. Your entire house will be destroyed. The room fell silent. Kael stood up. His voice was calm but terrifying. Prepare the army. Snow blinked. Wait, what? Kael continued. We will expose the chancellor. Seraphina frowned. That would mean confronting the royal court. Kael nodded. Yes. Snow stared at him. You're declaring war. Kael looked at her. If the kingdom wants Seraphina to become a villain. His silver eyes turned cold. Then I will become the villain they fear. Snow sighed dramatically. Great. The final boss has entered the battlefield. Chapter 34, A Promise Under the Stars. That night Snow couldn't sleep. She sat on the balcony looking at the stars. Seraphina joined her quietly. You're worried? Snow nodded. The story is becoming dangerous again. Seraphina sat beside her. Snow, why do you try so hard to save me? Snow looked down. For a long time in my previous life, I was alone. Seraphina listened quietly. Snow continued softly. When I met you in this world, you reminded me of someone who deserved happiness. Seraphina gently hugged her. Snow froze, then slowly hugged her back. Seraphina whispered, then let's survive this story together. Snow smiled. Deal. From the shadows nearby, Duke Kael watched silently. For a brief moment, even the cold villain allowed himself a small smile. Because for the first time in his life, he had something worth protecting. And the war for Seraphina's fate had only just begun. Chapter 35, The Chancellor's Trap. The royal court assembled the next morning. Nobles filled the enormous chamber, whispering nervously. At the center stood the royal chancellor, an old man with cold, calculating eyes. Beside him were royal guards, and kneeling in chains, Seraphina's uncle. Snow watched the scene from the balcony seats beside Seraphina and Duke Kael. Her small hands trembled. This scene, it happened exactly like this in the original novel. The chancellor raised his voice. House Seraphina has committed treason against the crown. Gasps filled the court. Seraphina's fingers tightened. Snow whispered urgently. This is the moment where everything collapses in the original story. The chancellor continued smoothly. We have evidence that the family conspired with northern forces. His eyes slowly moved toward Duke Kael, and with the Duke of the North. All eyes turned toward Kael. The chancellor smiled thinly. The villain and the villainess, working together. The court erupted in whispers. Snow felt her heart pounding. This man is trying to destroy them both at once. Seraphina stood up calmly. That accusation is false. The chancellor smiled. Then perhaps your grace can explain these documents. He raised several papers. Forged evidence. Snow clenched her fists. This is exactly how he destroyed her reputation before. But this time, the story was different. Chapter 36, The Villain Strikes Back. Before the chancellor could continue, Duke Kael stepped forward. His voice echoed coldly through the courtroom. You accuse Seraphina of treason. The chancellor smirked. The evidence is clear. Kael placed a sealed document on the table. Then perhaps we should review real evidence. The chancellor's smile faltered. The king frowned. What is this? Kael answered calmly. A report from my spies. Snow's eyes widened. Wait, he prepared a counterattack. The king opened the document. His expression darkened immediately. What is the meaning of this? Kael spoke quietly. The chancellor has been secretly negotiating with enemy kingdoms. Gasps spread through the hall. The chancellor shouted. That is nonsense. But Kael continued. We also captured several of his agents. The royal guards suddenly dragged 3 prisoners into the court. The chancellor's face went pale. Snow whispered in awe. He destroyed the villain in one move. Kael looked toward the chancellor. His silver eyes were merciless. You tried to frame Seraphina, but you forgot something. The chancellor trembled. What? Kael answered calmly. I am far worse than you. Chapter 37, Chaos in the Court. The court exploded into shouting. Nobles argued loudly. The king slammed his staff. Silence. The Chancellor tried desperately to defend himself. These accusations are fabricated. But the prisoners confessed immediately. The Chancellor ordered us. He planned to destroy House Seraphina. The king's face turned furious. Guards! The Chancellor collapsed as soldiers surrounded him. Snow felt relief wash over her. The original villain has fallen. Seraphina slowly sat down. Her uncle was freed from his chains. For the first time in weeks, the future looked safe. But Snow suddenly felt uneasy. The story shouldn't end this easily. Then she noticed something strange. Prince Adrian was watching everything silently. His expression serious, almost troubled. Snow frowned. Why does the male lead look like he knows something? Chapter 38, The Unexpected Confession. That evening, the palace garden was quiet. Snow walked alone along the path. She needed to think. But suddenly, Prince Adrian appeared. Snow. She froze. Male lead detected. The prince chuckled. You speak strangely. Snow crossed her arms. What do you want? Prince Adrian looked serious. I want to ask something. Snow narrowed her eyes. About Seraphina. Prince Adrian nodded. You're protecting her. Snow answered immediately. Yes. The prince looked at the sky. Then we are the same. Snow blinked. What? Prince Adrian looked back at her. I know someone is manipulating the royal court. Snow's eyes widened. But I cannot act openly yet. Snow stared. You knew about the conspiracy. Prince Adrian nodded slowly. Snow's brain nearly exploded. The male lead was secretly helping the whole time. Prince Adrian smiled gently. Seraphina deserves better than the fate people prepared for her. Snow muttered quietly. This story is completely different from the novel. Chapter 39, The Villain's True Feelings. Later that night, Snow returned to the estate. She found Duke Kael standing alone in the garden. He looked unusually thoughtful. Snow walked up to him. You did well today. Kael answered calmly. It was necessary. Snow tilted her head. Why do you care so much about Seraphina? Kael didn't answer immediately. Finally, he spoke quietly. Because when everyone feared me, she treated me like a human. Snow blinked. Kael continued. She never believed the rumors. Snow smiled softly. So the villain fell in love with the villainess. Kael didn't deny it. Snow laughed. This story really turned into a romance. Kael looked toward the mansion. Through the window, Seraphina could be seen reading quietly. His voice became gentle. I will protect her. Snow nodded. I know. For once, the villain and the fox understood each other perfectly.